Cause we all one human.
Finally.
Finally.
Here we go.
Yeah,
the
right.
plane finally gets to take off.
Right.
All right. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the HueMan Podcast.
Long overdue.
Long overdue,
Yeah.
but right on time.
Right.
This is, our intention. Well, first of all, let's start from the beginning. Let's not be
Right.
rude. My name is Dondre Woodfield.
And I'm Antonio Dixon.
Tony and I are both what we call Latinos.
Right.
Our mothers are African American. Our fathers are Latino. My father's Puerto Rican.
And then my father being Panamanian.
Yeah, and rest in peace to both of them. We are both no longer
Right.
with our fathers, and I think that is probably one of the driving forces behind what we wanted to do with this.
Right.
As men, the first model that you have for your manhood is your father.
Right.
And what do you do when you don't have that model that you can mirror?
Right.
Where do you get information about what it is to be a black or a brown man and how to properly matriculate into manhood and all the keys that are necessary to unlock brotherhood, fatherhood, husbandhood, and of course, manhood.
Right. We wanted to try to explore that, of course, from our unique perspective, but at the same time also kind of look into the other side of that, and that's just being a man and understanding what that is and what that looks like. And hopefully it'll be something that we can give the cheat code to a lot of men and young brothers and help them understand who they are in their manhood and understanding what it takes to be all these things that we don't necessarily have a blueprint to.
No. We are going to give you the cheat code.
Right.
We got them. We're going to give them to you. That's what this is about. The number one problem I feel like we have in this country is that we do not produce enough men that produce other men.
That part.
Like, obviously, our black and brown brothers are our target audience, but our sub audience are the women in our lives.
Right.
Whether it's your mother, your lover, your daughter, women really do have to understand, because I truly feel like it's required homework for us to know about our women. Sort of like the whole happy wife, happy life, saying. So we're required to learn about them, but I don't feel like they're required to learn about us. And I think this is really one of the easiest ways to understand, to really learn underneath the surface what makes black and brown men tick, why we do the things that we do, why we need the things that we need. Sort of be a great fly on the wall experience for the women in our lives.
I say this all the time. Where purpose isn't known, abuse is inevitable. So if you don't understand the intent or creation behind something and why it was even done in the first place, why it was created, why it was done the way it was, then you're ultimately going to abuse it. And abuse just comes from, and I've heard this several times, abuse comes from just the compound of two words: abnormal use. You're not going to use it the way it was designed to be used.
Yep.
And so you have a lot of men, because they don't understand their purpose, they don't understand their design, they don't understand their wiring, ultimately end up abusing women, sometimes physically, sometimes mentally, sometimes emotionally, and vice versa.
This being the first episode, we really wanted to break down for you guys why we started this in the first place, which you heard, what our intentions are behind this podcast. And then really begin to sort of break down, how we got to this place, how we arrived here. Our personal stories. When you understand our what, you understand our why. And also, we're going to be the kind of podcast that doesn't just give you testimony, but we're going to be giving you tools.
Right.
So testimony and tools. There are too many places that you go to where you're just getting a bunch of testimony and you're saying those stories sound fantastic.
How do I
What do
apply
I
this?
do?
Right.
How do I get to that?
Yeah.
How do I apply this? Like, what's the practical usage of all of that?
Right.
It's interesting because I've been in the entertainment industry for 4 decades. Painful for me to say that,
Right.
but but I'm proud nonetheless.
Mhm.
The accolades that come with that, Emmy nominations, all of those kinds of things. And I've always said that your passion will produce your profession. Your profession will gain you access to your platform, but your pain will produce your purpose.
Mm. Mm.
Tony and I have had great passions which produced our professions,
Right.
and it's gained us access to our platforms. And we finally began to figure out, okay, why do I have this platform?
Mm.
And as we started to examine, I wrote a book called Male versus Man, which is really on this subject in particular, in about manhood and the fact that I didn't have my father in my life, who went to prison for 13 years, the formative years of my adolescence.
Mm.
And they were super impactful
Mm.
because when you're left with that kind of emptiness where you don't have a drill instructor for your manhood, where your mom is the central figure to who and what you are, she can teach you how to be a great human being. But this issue of walking it out as a man is very nuanced.
I completely agree. To your point, that a lot of our pain helps to drive our purpose. And for me, being in the music business now over 20 years, to your point, I've been available. I've gotten to work with some of the greatest artists in the world, most of the greatest artists in the world. Um, I've had access to pretty much any and everyone, but at the same time, it gave us a platform. But it's like, well, what do you want to say with what it is with all that God has given you? What is it that you want to do with it? And it can't be self-absorbing. It can't be about me. It can't just be about gaining more and gaining more and gaining more. The whole point is to be a vessel that we get the download, but at the same time we give it away so that we have, so that it can keep going. I realized even for me early that a lot of my pain, I'll even say this, a lot of me even getting into my career came out of pain. I lost my father when I was a teenager. My father died in a car accident. Unfortunately, I was the last person to see him. He had dropped me off. He had dropped us off at school, was on his way to work, ends up in an 11-car pileup. Unfortunately, passes away. So I wrestled for years with even the concept of death, manhood, emotion. It was all things that I had to, I felt like I had to subdue because I thought manhood meant no emotion. I remember being told very clearly, and it was all done in good faith and out of the kindness of everyone's heart. But when my father passed, everybody telling me, you're the man of the house, take care of your mother, take care of your brother. I'm not understanding what that assignment meant at that time. All I could do was go off of the information I had gotten up to that point. It really, I think, stunted my growth as a man.
How so?
Well, because I think I didn't nurture it enough and mature enough at the time, going through the process of, if you just look at age, there's certain things that you're supposed to happen at a particular age. I just didn't feel that at that particular age. I got married at a particular age, and I thought, okay, this is what you do after, you graduate from college, you go to college and you meet a woman and you get married, and this is what you're supposed to do. And then the next step is to have kids and all these other things. And it took me realizing that even through that stage, there was still parts of my personality and growth that I felt were underdeveloped. As you know, and you've said this before, being a man has nothing to do with age.
Zero.
Yeah, it literally has everything to do with your matriculation and your understanding of what that assignment actually is.
Yep.
And so I wanted to make sure that once I got to that place, that I shared the knowledge that I had and the experiences I had with others. And I believe that led to, from the music business, like you said, led to the platform. and to the access.
Right.
But at the same time, now it's about taking the access and our platform and making sure that it goes right towards our purpose.
Well, what's interesting about everything that you're saying is you're one of those brothers out there, and you keep hearing people around you, whether it's in your household, your parents, your kids, the job, whatever that is, and people are talking about you underperforming as a man. We want you to specifically think about this. Everything that you do in this life that you become great at, what do you get in order to become great? Coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that we've ever done great in our lives. Like, you can have God-given ability, which we have.
Right.
But in order for you to go from being good at anything to being great at anything, you need coaching.
There it is.
For some reason, people think it's sort of like what I heard when I was about to get married. And I remember asking a few couples, like, well, when this happens or after you get married, what do you do? And I can't tell you the amount of people who said, you'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You won't.
Right.
And if you do, you'll be on your 6th marriage.
Right.
Because that's what happens when you have to figure it out on your own.
Right.
That's why skill sets are so important. And one of the things that I tell my bonus sisters is, look, usually when they're talking about the guy that didn't work out,
mm-hmm.
and they've got all the complaints, all the critiques, he's so and so, so forth. Look what I'm doing. And I have to tell them lovingly but firmly, when our brothers are locked in,
everything else falls into
place.
Yes. So it's crazy to me that we are told that we have to deal with this assignment and this job that we didn't sign up for.
Mm-hmm.
Life put it on us. And I'm not saying that as an excuse, but it's just the reality of our assignment. We're given this assignment that we're never really given the rules to. We're not given what the actual, to even know the benchmarks as to when you made it,
training.
the protocol, none of that. It's just you're supposed to figure it out. And then at the same time, when you don't figure it out, you're put in a position where you're chastised, ridiculed, now canceled, publicly or privately. Mm-hmm. And so it gets frustrating because we want to make sure that we gave, again, some cheat codes to just avoid a lot of these detours to your destiny and put people in a better position, and especially young men, put them in a better position of understanding so that they have the tools to navigate this world. And it has nothing to do with money, fame, riches, none of that other stuff.
Sure doesn't.
Yeah, it's just really about manhood.
If it did, then our brother Ja Morant would be in a better position. Look, and when I say this, whenever we give specific examples, which we are in order to give people context,
right.
We are not like other podcasts where they'll, bring someone's name up and then trash this brother.
No.
That's not what we're doing here.
No.
We are using Ja Morant as an example in order to bring context to the conversation. We really bring his name up with great empathy and compassion because we understand what it's like to let me tell you something. The one thing about having money before you have the tools that unlock your character, you will literally and figuratively kill yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Because you have access to things that other people do not.
Right.
So what Brother Ja was given was, he was given the information and instruction and accountability to become a great basketball player.
Right.
But it's fairly obvious that he wasn't given the likewise information, instruction, and accountability to become a great man.
I completely agree. I also think, to add to that, I think to take it one step further, I would beg to question, and again, this is not a judgment at all,
Nope.
but my next step would be, okay, those in his life, from his father to the other men in his life, I wonder what kind of instruction they received.
We already know the answer to that.
Right.
Because if his father, all due respect to his father, T, we know that your father can only give you what he had.
Right. Right.
When my father passed away, he was on his deathbed, and I said, Pop, what was your relationship like with your father? I suspected, but I never had the concrete proof.
Right.
He said, I never had a relationship with my father. I said, you never had any relationship with your father?
Right.
He said, no, I never knew my father. I said, wait a minute. You never knew your father? He said, no, I never even saw a picture of my father. I'm like, what? Every piece of animosity that I ever had toward my father was gone in that moment. Because what I recognized was this was a child whose heart was fractured like mine was in not having a father.
Yeah.
Completely got it. Yeah. He wasn't at that point, my father was no longer my father. He became my brother.
Right. I think it's crazy because we as a society at large are so quick to judge the symptom and point out the symptom and not really address the root core of the problem.
Yep.
You know what I mean? We're really quick to go into the action that was done, whatever the action was, whether it be, whether it be infidelity, whether it be violence, whether it be a gun, whether it be, whatever the situation is that we clearly make press and that tend to make news. We're really quick to go ahead and chastise and point that out and, again, get quick to cancel people, but that never really cures the problem. It's like putting a Band-Aid over the problem and thinking that just because they're out of sight, that it's out of mind, and that you actually fix the problem. You know, to your point, and you look at in Brother John Morant's case, like him being, let's just say for whatever they choose to be the punishment for what has happened in his life, that's not going to fix the problem if he doesn't get the tools that are necessary to keep from repeating the issues. Yeah. And I promise you, the issue is not the gun.
Right.
You know what I mean? It probably has nothing to do with the gun.
Absolutely.
The gun is a symptom of the problem.
What does the gun represent?
Right.
What does the gun represent? Like, we sit here and I feel like, we talk ourselves in a circle about these kinds of issues. And it's so terrible because this is what I want folks to know. We have a heart for this work for the sake of us growing our brothers because we recognize this. Every other group that you could come up with in this society is going to be given the benefit of the doubt at some point. Someone is going to give you grace about the mistakes that you make. Whether it's our sisters, whether it's other people, and I'm not trying to anger anybody, but you can think you guys can go down the different groups that are marginalized, in society, that are ridiculed in society. But we get marginalized, demonized, and our skin gets weaponized. Other groups, no matter who it is, a child, a woman, our brothers from, I'm just going to say it, our brothers from the LGBTQIA plus community. You can name a bunch of different communities where folks will have a certain kind of grace.
Right.
And men don't have that. And I'm going to go a step further with this. We are targeted in society right now where it feels like no matter what you do and no matter what you say, somehow it's toxic.
Right.
The nature of this podcast,
right,
the nature of the things that we talk about somehow are going to be labeled as toxic. And all we're trying to do is to help men be seen, be heard, and give them tools so that they can show up for the betterment of all the groups that we just mentioned.
Right.
And
exactly. Yeah, somebody will find something and that's fine. We have a specific assignment. We have particular people that we're supposed to reach, and those will be reached. I really want to make sure that we reiterate the point that this is about creating and giving us tools.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you want to hear testimony and you want to hear, of opportunities of, growth and development. But at the same time, without the tools, some practical tools to be able to say, okay, on a daily basis, this is what I can do. I'll give you kind of one of the things that I did. And hopefully this will help someone. One of the things that I did recently, just a few years ago, was I sat down and I literally wrote a letter to my father. And I wrote it, and I wrote down everything that I never got to say to him, everything that was never said after, prior to his passing, and everything I thought and wish I had heard a response to after his passing.
Right.
And I wanted to make sure that any question I had, I figured out, and I looked at where I could find that answer from, or I looked at the supplements that was given, because I'm also a firm believer that even though tragedy and traumas happen in life, I'm also a big believer that God gives us supplements along the way. He never leaves us empty.
Yep.
And so I wanted to make sure that I kind of looked at those things. And I wrote this letter and I literally read it out loud. It made me emotional. I wept and everything, but it was one of those things where I felt like it was so necessary because it gave me a little bit of closure that I never had, because it took me years to even accept that he was gone. I had some of the weirdest dreams. Even to this day, I have sometimes the weirdest dreams about him. Like, I've had dreams that, like, not that he died, but he left and started another family somewhere else, and he came back to visit, and all this, these crazy things, because I never reconciled the fact that, again, he's gone, but he's transitioned into a different form. Right. And at the same time, God is going to still be my father, and he's going to supplement me in all the things that my earthly father couldn't.
Yep.
And so I had to deal with all of those things. And so I wrote this letter, man, and to tell you that it was the hardest thing to read out loud. I didn't read it to anybody. It was just one of those things I read. And then after I did it, I felt this huge weight lifted off of me. Just to be able to start to reconcile where my issues were, where my holes were, my emotional holes, my attachment issues, my abandonment issues, my emotional issues, all of these things that I never really dealt with, my confrontation issues.
Yep.
I'm one of those people who it took me a long time to be able to deal with confrontation in a healthy manner because I didn't really see it growing up.
Yep.
Again, I had to navigate so much of that stuff myself. And I'm sure it affected my relationships. It's affected my business relationships. There's other opportunities that didn't happen, I'm sure, because I didn't handle conflict well.
Right.
You know what I mean? If I heard somebody say something about me, even let's just say in the music business, if I heard something was said about me that I didn't get a chance to defend, I didn't want to deal with you anymore. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about the opportunity. I just didn't want to deal with you anymore. But not realizing that maybe the job was, if I dealt with that better, maybe they needed healing through my interaction. And I didn't understand all of those things. So that was one of the tools that was really important to me was, okay, write it down. Write down some of the things that you were really hurting at. Look at it yourself. Look at some of your holes. And then you start to slowly work those things out and start to let God and let, again, hopefully a platform like this help fill those holes with some of the tools that are necessary to heal those wounds so that you can continue to be healthy,
Yeah. Beliefs produce behavior. Beliefs produce behavior. So let's reverse engineer this. If you have behavior that you don't like, that other people around you don't like, that they're saying you should change, and you feel like they should, examine what your behavior is and then begin to ask yourself, what is it that I believe that's producing that behavior?
Right.
Because as soon as you can put your finger on what the behavior is, and then begin to examine what it is that you believe that produced that behavior, you can change the behavior when you change what it is that you believe.
I love that. And to add to that, I would say at some point you have to look back at when did that belief system even begin? What was the birthplace of that belief? There's somewhere along your journey that you were told and fed something that you chose to believe that stuck with you.
Yep.
Whether it is I'm not pretty enough, I'm not strong enough. I'm not man enough. I'm not mature enough. I'm not rich enough.
Yep.
Whatever it is that, that you were told or taught, for whatever it was told to you, and you chose to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, your behavior just started to align with your belief system. And so you acted out your beliefs. And for me, I'll just give one for myself. My whole thing with this show, I'm going to be so much about vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like my vulnerability has become my superpower.
Mm-hmm.
It's helped heal me.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It was one of those things that for years I didn't feel comfortable talking about. So, but when it comes to my belief system, there was always this belief there was a belief that I had birthed at an early age, that people don't really care about you, that people are here to use you.
Mm-hmm.
And so what did I do? I made sure that I built up a wall to only let them in so far, because I refused to allow myself to be used. I refused to allow myself to be abused. You were never going to put me in a situation where I was vulnerable to the point where I gave to you and you didn't return it and all this other stuff. And I realized that all it did was create these walls that I ended up becoming caged in. Because then when people actually tried to come in my life that were, trying to accept me for who I was, I gave them no space to do that.
Yep.
Because I was not comfortable with it. Because I'd gotten comfortable in my cage, in my prison. You know what I mean? I'd gotten comfortable and I'd figured out how to furnish it really nice and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a while to realize that that's not why I was created. I wasn't created for myself. I wasn't created to just be. I was created to make sure that I became.
Mm-hmm.
And so to your point, like, I had to start to realize that when it comes to these behaviors, it's a belief that somewhere was birthed out of a trauma that you chose to believe. I know that there's that saying that we hear all the time, hurt people hurt people. But I also believe healed people heal people too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so I think we needed to make sure that this platform was going to be a place of healing, and make sure there was a place of understanding and empathy, and not just a place of ridicule and chastisement and all these other things that, so many others. If you're here for that, there's plenty other places for you to go look.
It's so interesting when you, just us having this conversation about beliefs producing behaviors, and us having a loving space for our brothers to get to. Something really powerful happened to me yesterday. And you touched on something that was really important, because I think some of us feel like we have to be someone of note in order to create impact.
Right.
You said heal people, heal people. So yesterday I was driving to the gym to pick up my son who was training, and he was strength training. On my way to pick him up, a brother's walking in the street, and he makes eye contact with car, ultimately me, and turns around. So say this were my car here. He turns his body this way, so getting his back to ultimately where the car was, and motioned like he was going to jump out in front of my car. It scared me to I swerve, I get out of the way. Ultimately, he didn't do anything. I look in the rearview mirror to see what's going. See, something is obviously going up, but I was hot.
Right.
The first thing that happened was, I grew up in the hood. I grew up in Brooklyn. People think that they know me because of my 40-year career in the industry, and they think, oh, this is yo man, yo man.
Right.
So the first thing that I react out of, I make this joke all the time. There's two versions of myself. There's Brooklyn Dre, and then there's Disciple Don Dre. And Brooklyn Dre wanted to get out the car, and Brooklyn Dre wanted to get out the car.
Right. I was looking for bail money. Yeah.
So, but it very quickly hit me, hey man, there's something wrong with my brother.
Right.
I said to myself, when I pick up my son, I'm going to come back this way. If that brother's there, I'm going to have a talk with him. Pull back around that curb. He's sitting right on the curb. not far from where the incident happened. I pull up. I look to him. I said, why would you do that? And he looked at me. I said, you don't recognize me? You don't recognize this car? And it finally hit him. I said, my brother, listen to me. Don't act like your current circumstances. I want you to act like you want your circumstances to become. Your story is still being written. I said, the only way that you can do what you did is because of what you believe. And you believe right now that you're dying.
Right.
And that was a representative of, I may as well start to get it over with. Because my belief is that I'm dead. Right. So my behavior will be of dead behavior.
Right.
I said, every single day you are writing your story. And I understand that your circumstances right now don't look good, but don't do the kind of behaviors that feel representative of your current circumstances. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I love you. Right. And I said, I know you probably saying that's not possible because I don't know you, but this is exactly what love means.
Right.
I don't need to know you in order to love you.
Nope.
And that's one of the words that we run from as men because society shames us out of anything that somebody would say would be something vulnerable, which is really something human.
Right.
Something human.
Right.
If my creator, and I don't want to offend anybody's belief system, but if our creator didn't want us to feel what we feel, we wouldn't have been given emotions.
Right.
If we weren't meant to cry, we wouldn't be given tear ducts.
Right. Right. I completely agree. I think, unfortunately, the only aspects of our personality that tends to be celebrated as men is lust and anger.
So terrible.
You know, man. It's celebrated, and, you know, of course, there's ample songs about it.
And there are so many, you said celebrated, there's so many dudes. I'm not even going to say men.
Yeah.
Because as I talk about in my book, males look to be served while men look to be of service. These are dudes that get celebrated for being angry and for being lustful.
Absolutely.
And women somehow get us mistaken for one another. And we are not those guys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny because because it's so celebrated, again, if you don't have a measuring stick or the tools, you assume that's, if you're coming up, you assume that that's what manhood looks like.
Yep. I
remember thinking as I was growing up that getting to a certain status, making a certain amount of money, a particular type of house, in a particular neighborhood, all that stuff were the definition of manhood.
Yep.
And not realizing that that has nothing to do with it at all.
Zero.
And then, you know, being able to get a lot of it, and then you get it and you get on the other side of it and you're like, nothing feels different than when I was coming up anyway. It didn't make me feel any more validated. It didn't make me feel any better. I might have gotten a couple more looks because of what I was driving or whatever. But at the same time, it doesn't always bring positive attention either.
Yep.
And then realizing that none of that stuff makes me.
Mm-mm.
You know, if I'm in a Prius or a Rolls, I make what's in, you know what I mean? It's about me. It has nothing to do with...
I can still be a great man no matter what car I drive.
Exactly. And we know that love is such a foreign concept to us, and how we express it and how we receive it and how we give it away and all these other things. It's, you know, again, we're celebrated. And so it's such a celebrated thing when it's lust and when it's anger. You know, you got, as long as if I show you that I love you, I can show you I love you by how much I want to sleep with you. Mm-hmm. I can show you that I love you by how much money I spend on you. I can show you I love you by the fact that I got your back and I'm going to fight for you. And, you know, if we get into a fight, even in, you know, male to male relationships mm-hmm. and man to man relationships, I show you how much I love you by all the things that I'll do for you. Know, don't let somebody come. I got you. I got my brother. Matter of fact, I'm going to join this game because I'm going to let you know I love you, mm-hmm. you know, and not realizing that love is a much broader term, and it's a much broader concept that we have to figure out, be better and more comfortable expressing in other areas of our lives. It doesn't just have to be those narrow-minded ways of thinking, you know. And it's, unfortunately, as we said earlier in the show, like, so much, because all of these things we've had lack in,
Yeah.
it's trickled down to our family. So again, to me, it starts with the man, then it carries over into our relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Our relationships carry over into our families. Our families are nothing but multiplications of society.
Yep.
Community is society, and society is a multiplication of the world. So if you're questioning how do we fix all of these ailments and all these pains that we have to deal with in the world and our community, our society, and our family, and our relationships, it starts with us. Everything else will trickle down. And so I think it was so necessary. This to me was a platform that was created out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about anything other than us looking at our own circumstances and looking around and saying, we have to make and reproduce better men. One of the things that I really feel like was eye-opening for me during this pandemic was I looked at how I looked at the pandemic as nothing but a metaphor for ourselves, in that I believe that all of us come with emotional viruses. All of us come with emotional issues within us that we have to be careful how we spread them.
Yep.
We have to be careful. We have to now start having to think, I can't just pop off, because my action is going to cause a reaction. Mm-hmm. That's going to cause another reaction. Mm-hmm. That could spread. Mm-hmm. If I don't get myself together and make sure that I'm healthy, just like we had to do in the pandemic, if I don't make sure that I take care of myself and be healthy, I don't know how my actions are going to affect the world. We act like it's not a big deal.
Yep.
And we act like it's justified and it's validated for us to pop off and be angry or do whatever we do. But we don't understand that, look, it's nothing but a snowball effect. Mm-hmm. Anything that I do is going to ultimately affect those around me. And so I looked at the pandemic as very much just a physical metaphor for some of the same emotional things that we deal with on a daily basis. We don't take care of ourselves enough. Yep. We don't protect ourselves enough. We don't know when to screen and mask our mouth and cover what we need to say. We don't think before we go into certain areas or certain communities or certain places that maybe I shouldn't be here. Yep. Maybe this is a toxic environment for me to stay out of. Yep. And maybe this environment is somewhere I need to stay away because it may just get on me. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't think about all of those things the same way we had to deal with the pandemic. I think we have to kind of look at ourselves in the same way so that we can handle ourselves in a much better light. And so we can get out of this pandemic of toxic, what they call masculinity. Yep. And I'll say toxic femininity, just toxic identity. You know, to me, it's toxic identity. We're dealing with an identity crisis.
Yep. This is kind of like when you're a kid and you're sitting down at dinner and there's certain stuff that you love eating, and then there's other stuff that you just really don't like eating. Right. And really, as you become the person that you should become, when you mature, when you become a man, when you become a woman, you realize that those things that don't taste good are actually the things that are good for us.
Right. Right.
So those are the kinds of tools that's an additional tool that we really want to focus on, which is, look, not everything that we do that feels good is good for us. Right. A man would sit there and be calm in the midst of that chaos in order to produce that thought, use that tool and say, okay, hey, I'm going to make sure that I do that. Because we rarely, again, these aren't things that people teach us.
No, not at all.
We act on instinct.
Right.
We're physical beings first.
Right.
We rarely ever think those things through. That's why a bunch of unnecessary pregnancies happen, because we're in the midst of, yo, man, I'm going to do what feels good.
In the moment. Mm-hmm.
In that moment.
Oh, my gosh. You nailed it, man. You made something came to my mind with what you just said. Dr. Miles Monroe said something that I loved.
I love Dr. Miles.
Oh, my gosh. You know, rest in heaven.
That dude
he
was
amazing. Oh my gosh, he was amazing. So he was talking about how being on the freeway, he was on the freeway and God had spoken to him and he said, okay, which exits on this freeway are bad? And he's like, what are you talking about? I don't understand what you mean by it. I'm paraphrasing, but right. You know, he was like, what exits on this freeway are bad? And he's like, I don't know. And God said, the answer he got was, none of them are bad, but not all of them are right. And he said the difference between good and bad, and he said all exits are good.
Yep.
But the right exit is all determined by your destination.
Period.
So again, if you tie it all in, if you understand your destination, your destiny, your purpose, why you were created, God looked back and said, there's some point in time in the history of mankind that your presence was necessary to be on this planet.
No question.
That you have something to do that no one else could do with all your wiring, all your history, all your traumas, and he wants you to do it.
Man, all right. Well, so now you've got some tools, right? We know that beliefs produce behavior.
Yes.
We also want you to make sure that you're being mindful of it's going to feel good to me, but is it going to be good for me? So those two, we feel like right out of the gate, you got something that you can reach into your toolbox and use. Because remember, we know the saying, if the only tool that you got in your tool belt is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
There it is.
You know, as a man, you need some finesse tools. And there you have it. I'm Dondre Whitfield.
And I'm Antonio Dixon.
And this is the HueMan Podcast.
Thank you for checking us out. We love you. We'll see you next time.
'Cause we all want HueMan.